All right, Dr. Hendricks, you said you trusted my intuition. And my first question is just throwing you right in the deep end here. Okay? I'm so curious to know, how much do you feel you are living in your zone of genius right now? You've been at it for decades. What would you give yourself now?
I would give myself straight A's or 100% or a 10-10
Yes.
now. I
Amazing.
started focusing on that back in the 80s and have been focused on it a lot with 20,000 people ever since, plus myself. Uh, so I can definitely see the steady rise. Like I would say in 1990, 30 years ago, I was probably 75% in my genius zone. And then Conscious Loving came out, and we were on Oprah and a whole bunch of things, and I that brought in more people, so I had more people to work with over the next 10 years. And so and I kept working on myself, and my goal was to be 100% in my genius zone by the end of the century, by 2000. And so I made it, and for the last 23 years I've pretty much stayed there. And once you get into your genius zone, there's some tricks of the trade to stay there. That's kind of the hard part, is to stay there for a long time, and I can
Yes.
talk about that. But yeah, that's I've had 23 years now of waking up every day feeling like the luckiest man alive, because I get to live in my genius zone and I get to be married to Katie Hendricks.
Yes, and like you said, you get to work with so many people along the way. And one of the things that resonates so much with the book, The Genius Zone and Me, is that like this flywheel effect of individuals getting into their genius zone then helps unlock more people to do the same. And this idea of like raising consciousness is, why I do marketing, which is a bit, some people don't see that connection, but I see, getting your brilliance into the world as this like ripple effect of raising consciousness. And that is the big question, especially for us as coaches who are building businesses. There, for most of us, is that phase of like, okay, I signed up to be a coach and now I have taxes and marketing and all these other things that I, am picking up on this path. In your book, The Big Leap talks about the quadrants of helping you realize, what is your zone of excellence versus your zone of genius. And I think at, the beginning of our business, we can conceptualize that. But then on the path, things keep getting added. So
Yes.
please talk to us about how we stay in it, even as we continue evolving and expanding.
Yes. Well, one thing that happens is most of us are not very good at savoring our own success. I don't know if you've noticed that with people, but they are very quick to appreciate the good works of others or the inventions of others or what other people do, but they're very reluctant to talk about their own gifts and talents and what they're doing in the world. And so, you're in the field of marketing. I say people are marketing all day long, whether they know it or not. Everybody's in the process of marketing. It's just that many of us are marketing concepts like procrastination and settling for less and thinking poorly of ourselves. That's our product we're marketing. That was a big turning point for me when I first started catching on to all this and started looking at my own zone of genius, that I was only spending about 10% of my time in my own genius zone. And that horrified me when I first looked at it, because I realized I had a lot of work to do myself to learn to live. I would have flashes of being in my genius zone, but like you say, staying there is a whole different thing. So here's a couple of things I found to watch out for. One thing that happens is once you start to be successful in your genius zone, other people will come along and offer you things. And you have to be very careful. They'll offer you deals, they'll offer you opportunities because you're more successful, you're more out there. But the trap there is a lot of times what they're offering you is stuff that's in your excellence zone, stuff that they know you can do. And it's okay to do a little bit of that kind of thing to pay the bills and everything, but be very careful about saying yes to things that are not in your genius zone. That's the number one thing that takes you out of your genius zone, is people say, oh, okay, that's not really in my genius zone, but I could make $50,000 quickly doing that. So yeah, sign me up. And I've done that myself. And I even had a pop quiz from the university about 10 years ago, even though I'd been really established in my genius zone for many years. An opportunity came along to me where a famous person, I won't mention his name, but everybody knows his name, came along and offered me an opportunity to be in a business deal with him. And it wasn't in my genius zone, but I thought, oh, wow, there'd be so many other good things that came along with that. Maybe just this one time I'll say yes. Oh, that turned into tears within about 6 months. It was great for a little while, and then he turned out to be the worst business partner. So anyway, I've been punished for saying yes to things that are not in my zone of genius, and I just don't do it anymore. You know, back when I was younger and hungrier, it made an easier decision sometimes to compromise my principles. That was back in the 80s and 90s. But once, you know, it's like somebody asked Mick Jagger why he no longer took drugs. And he said, well, once you've been to a few funerals, you know, you begin to wake up. And same thing with me. You know, I began to see more and more of when I said yes to things that weren't in my genius zone, it never did work very well. So I just stopped doing it. And I found that anytime you say no to something that's not in your zone of genius, about half a dozen new things open up that are in your genius zone. It's like you have to kind of take the power of saying no. What I call a conscious no, not a no. I've considered that and I've decided not to do it. If I'd had that 10-second conversation with the famous guy back in 2013, I could have saved myself a couple of years of time and some tears. Even though I made a little money on it, it wasn't worth it.
Yeah, I feel like there's an underpinning of worthiness in this. And like you said, you know, being young or inexperienced or chasing the money can guide us to those unaligned yeses. And for me, I know I've done that in the times when I don't feel worthy of like letting it be easy or truly living in my creativity. There's still some of that, you know, well, I can do it, right? That zone of excellence piece. So how does worthiness play into that decision making that you're talking about?
Oh, really great question. Thank you for asking that. The reason I'm saying it's such a great question is it's probably the number one unconscious thing that hooks people into doing an upper limits problem, hurting themselves or losing money or, you know, having unpleasant things happen. One of the big fears that human beings carries around is our fear that we're not worthy. Here at the Institute, we call it the fear that I'm fundamentally flawed in some way. Like some people think they're not smart enough to be successful, or they're the wrong weight, or they're the wrong skin color. I remember the first time we were on Oprah talking to her. I'd never met her before we were on her show. And, you know, just talking to her about the levels of stuff she had to get through to even get, you know, she was first on a little public affairs show in Baltimore, Maryland. But even to get there, she had to go through the gateway of, you're a woman, and a gateway of, you're black, and you're a gateway of, you're overweight. And so every time she went through one of these gateways, then there was another one. And finally, you know, she just kept opening and hanging in there and keeping her eye on the vision until she ended up with that show she owned in Chicago. And I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you unless we'd been on that show a couple of times, because it exposed us to an audience. I always say we went overnight from working with 10 couples in our living room to working with 10 million on Oprah once we got out on her stage. So it really changed everything for us and put us out there for we ended up doing almost 2 million frequent flyer miles of trips around the world doing relationship seminars. And actually that led to my writing The Big Leap, because I was so tired of traveling around doing relationship seminars that I wanted to write another bestseller, actually, to take the attention off just doing relationship seminars. And so I wrote The Big Leap, and it's been a great word-of-mouth bestseller ever since. It keeps selling more and more every year, which is really unusual for a book.
Yeah. Well, it is remarkable. It is easy to share, which we talk about also in marketing. And I think that's a great example of perhaps a time where you went back into your zone of excellence. Like, okay, Oprah gave us all of this exposure. I can do retreats all over the world. I can travel. And then maybe it's not this specific example, but do you remember that conversation with yourself or that aha moment of like back to writing? Because that's clearly your zone of genius.
Yeah, I remember walking in the front door of our old building over when we were in downtown Santa Barbara back in late 90s. I had just come back from doing seminars in something like 19 seminars in 21 days, and I was just blitzed as far as tired. And I remember coming in the door, and I saw Katie, my wife, sitting there with our bookkeeper, and they both had kind of glum looks on their face. And the message that was making them so glum was that the previous year we'd made so much money, we had to pay so many taxes that I had to borrow money from myself to pay my taxes. And I'm standing there, just come back off the road, and gosh, I know I just made another $500,000 out there on this last little circuit. Does that mean I'm going to have to borrow more money from myself to pay the tax? Anyway, it was like why am I doing this kind of thing? Mm-hmm. And a heart-sinking moment. And I remember talking to Katie later and thinking, let's do a little reinvention here. If we're having to give all of our money over to, to the feds and to California and everything, we're doing something a little wrong. And so anyway, we reinvented our business, and we did a few little things like getting rid of our beach house and getting rid of a mountain house and getting rid of a business building, and a lot of, you might from the outside call it downsizing. I call it right-sizing, because Katie and I realized we were spending so much of our time thinking about real estate, because we had all these different places and things we owned and everything. And so, it's like some guy said when he bought a Rolls Royce. He said, the two best days of my life were the day I took ownership and the day I unloaded it on the next poor guy.
Yes. Yes.
And so, we had a tremendous amount of success in the 90s, but it didn't lead to a lot of real soul satisfaction ultimately. And we realized it was because of that problem. We were doing a lot of it for the money, and, both of us come from middle class or lower middle class backgrounds, and so it felt good to have a lot of money pouring in. But after you get a few wrinkles out of your stomach, then you take a look and say, wait a minute, am I doing this for the right purpose?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I only have one house right now, but I can relate to so much of what you're saying. And in those moments, getting the clues both in energy, like you said, that soul satisfaction, and then also looking at the results and looking at the numbers and asking yourself, like, does this make sense? And I talk a lot about plugging energy leaks so that we can win back the spaciousness that you're talking about, right? To get back into the zone of genius. Okay, so spaciousness. Do you have something on that? I saw like a full body nod.
I appreciate you bringing up that concept, because let me get very philosophical here for a second, or physical or physics or whatever. But human beings, see, there's 3 levels of matter. There is physical matter. You and me have skin, and we're talking on machines, so there's physical matter. But then there's energy, and that's all the hums and buzzes and pulses and currents that you can feel inside you, as well as, a lot of people are sensitive enough that they can kind of sense the energy in a room when they walk into it. So there's that energy level of being. So there's mass and then there's energy. But the third thing is space. And most of us have access to a lot more space than we give ourselves credit to. Like, if you look out at the nighttime sky, you can see that there's a whole bunch of stars, but if you look beyond the stars, there's an immense amount of space that's just somehow holding those stars. And so human beings are the same way. We have mass, we have a physical body, and we have energy, but then we have this vast amount of space inside us that we don't usually occupy because of the busy traffic jam going on in our mind all the time. But if you just take, like here we say, take 3 easy, slow, deep breaths. And if you take a breath that lasts about 10 seconds in and out, if you take 3 of those, science has actually measured that you turn off your stress chemistry in your body. So we're only 3 deep, easy breaths away from lowering our stress chemistry. I would have liked to have learned that in the 1st grade or in the 12th grade or in my PhD training somewhere along the line. I wish somebody had told me, just take 3 easy breaths sometime when things are looking hard, or when you're feeling stressed out, or if you're sad or scared or angry, or if you're feeling waves of delight. Take 3 easy breaths to feel that, because that takes you into this dimension of life that I call space. And it's a great place to be, because it's really the only place where we can experience ultimate freedom and peace, is if you can feel your way into that space in yourself that holds all of your emotions, but is not your emotions, or holds all of your thoughts, but it's not just your thoughts. So there's this vast space that all of those occur in. And actually, I don't know if I wrote about this in The Big Leap, but did I write in there about that time I fell on the ice?
I think so.
Okay, well,
That's sounding familiar.
Can I give you a 2-minute version of what happened? Because it's very key to this whole space issue.
Yeah.
I was once very obese. I'd grown up. I was an obese kid. I had something wrong. I was taken around to umpteen medical specialists, and I was shot up with hormones. And one year they put me on amphetamines when I was in the 9th grade, so I was wired all the time. But I made straight A's because I couldn't sleep at night. And so as soon as they unplugged me from the amphetamines, I went zoom back to being B's and C's again. But so I struggled with obesity. Finally, at age 24, I solved the problem, but not through taking any pills or anything. On, let's see, I believe it was a January day in 1969, I was 24 years old, and I weighed more than 300 pounds. If you look at me today, I'm 180 pounds, I'm 6 feet tall, you'd say, there goes an athletic-looking old guy. And but 300 pounds, definitely not athletic. And so there I was, 100 pounds overweight. I was stuck in a terrible relationship I'd gotten into, but I couldn't figure out how to get out of, and I didn't have money to move to another place. I had something like $39 in the bank. I smoked heavily. I was a 2 or 3 pack a day cigarette smoker. Anyway, I was in a job I didn't like. Everything was wrong in my life. So I went out for a walk one day to kind of clear my head, and I slipped on the ice and went flam down on my back. And 300 pounds is approximately what a refrigerator weighs. So whoop, down on my back, and I banged my head, although I didn't knock myself out. But I call it now having an out of Hendricks experience, because it was like for 2 minutes, it knocked me into a different perception of myself. And I could see down through these layers of feelings I'd never talked about, anger and sadness and fear. And I could see how my fat was a defense against letting myself feel and be who I really was, that I overate when I was scared or angry or sad. And so that, regardless of whatever was wrong with my glands, that was a problem. But as I was laying there on the ice, I realized, oh, there's this whole part of me that's beyond all of my emotions and my thoughts. There's what I called at the time pure consciousness, this big open space inside me. And I'd never noticed it before because I think I was so caught up in my mind and everything that I'd never realized this consciousness. And I made this declaration as I was coming back to my regular wits, realizing I was on the ground and it was cold and everything. I made this vow. I said, I'm going to do everything I can to feel that pure consciousness in every moment of my life. And so that declaration, that commitment, led me to start eating a different way. I started eating only foods that seemed to feed that pure consciousness, that didn't feed my old fat body. And within 30 days, I'd lost 35 pounds just by changing what I ate. I didn't do any exercise or anything. That was astounding to me. So anyway, I find that if we can tune in inside and let ourselves really experience whatever we're experiencing, that act also opens up that feeling of spaciousness inside. When we have a problem, oftentimes our old unconscious mind wants to fix that as quickly as possible. And it'll come up with all sorts of solutions, not all of which are great for us. But what we need to do, let's say you're feeling sad. I remember I noticed this particularly in that relationship, that troubled relationship, because we had to break up and I was feeling sad. And I could feel how I didn't want to let myself feel that. You know, I wanted to go out and do something or avoid it or eat something. But I realized if I simply let myself feel it, breathe with it, open up to it, what I call savoring, you know, just letting myself savor it. Even though it was an unpleasant experience, I learned that if I let myself savor it, it went away. If I tried to get rid of it, it stayed there. And that was a huge learning for me, to let myself feel things rather than rush on past them. Yes. And so to this day, that's one of the great learnings that I've ever experienced, because within a year, I lost more than 100 pounds. My vision changed. I no longer had to wear glasses when I took my driver's test. I got into a better relationship. As of 1980, Katie and I met each other and fell in love, and so we're in our 44th year together. So everything that good happened in my life, I think, started flowing from that moment on the ice where I made that decision about bringing forth pure consciousness and stopping all the stuff that had made me fat and unconscious.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you for taking it to the philosophical level, because when you said, I wish they had taught me to take 3 deep breaths in first grade to feel that spaciousness, I was thinking, I wish someone had told me to clean my closets while I was building a business, because I have seen like the material, less material creates for me, I know it's also mental real estate, that spaciousness has allowed. And in my own way, tapping into the spaciousness has helped me get that clear vision. For you, it was health and feeling your feelings. And for me, it's the type of business owner that I want to be. And in doing that, becoming clear because of the space on who she is, I've been able to become a much better delegator, which is a huge piece of getting into your zone of genius. And it's just by asking myself, like, who can help me with this? What does she do? Who does she hire? So I would love to hear, because I know you've mentioned in your books you weren't a natural delegator, and most of us as visionaries and generators of ideas and books, we don't, think about teaching someone else our creativity or giving them other pieces of, how we run our life. So talk to us a little bit about how to delegate mindfully in a way that helps other people also live in their zone of genius.
Yes, well, one good way to think about it, Hannah, is to think about how can I give away something that's not in my genius zone that might be in somebody else's genius zone. So that's a new concept of delegation. When I used to think of the hard times I had with delegations, it was asking somebody to do something I didn't want to do. I felt guilty about that. Even though the person might be paid for it, I would feel guilty about it. I don't feel that anymore, also because I've had a knack over the past bunch of years for hiring people that are smarter than I am in certain ways. You know, I want everybody here to be in their genius zone. And you know, I've got to brag a little about Margaret, our executive administrator. She is so good at simply executing tasks that I would find boring or, you know, difficult to do. But she is just boom, boom, boom. And it doesn't, she never seems to be stressed out by it or anything like that. So it's a natural gift of hers to, you know, and she's got 5 kids and 7 grandkids. So I can see how she got to that place in a way, because she had to be good at delegating things, I think. But she is so good at executing tasks. And what she's also good at is finding other people to do things she doesn't feel good about doing that they love to do. So we're building these stacks of people here, all of who are doing things they love to do. Like our accountant and our bookkeeper. Now for me, you know, I always say my math skills stopped around 4th grade when they were doing long division. That was a tough concept for me to master. And I barely made it through PhD training, all the statistics and everything. But anyway, math is not my strong suit. But our accountant and bookkeeper, they just love that. And they love talking about the numbers. And we've had the same one for years and years and years, because they're always in such a positive mood about it. So that helps me with delegation. If I can have the context for delegation be putting something in somebody else's genius box that's not in mine. And so that's what I aim for when I delegate. Find people that are smarter than you in a given area.
Yes. Yes. We're using human design on our team to really see those puzzle pieces of like, what are you wired for? Like, what is your soul's blueprint? And yes, you need to have the work experience and you know how to do the task. But I've also started hiring more for like genius zones instead of, yeah, here's what I don't want to do, or here's what's annoying me. Let me just kind of drive by and give it to someone else and hope for the best. And it's amazing how the energy game also up levels, right? Like I interacted with Margaret to book this podcast, and she's lovely. And that energy matters, especially when you're building a business and interacting with customers or readers. I think it's really important for us to know that we're, like you said, hiring people smarter than us, not just because they can do it or for the paycheck. And so much of this you talked about at the end of the Genius Zone and this shift that we're feeling. I definitely know this paradigm, which has historically been more masculine, more regimented, more climb the corporate ladder, duplicate your suburbs, right? Like we're now shifting into a much more feminine era. And I also know astrology, like the age of Aquarius is coming, which truly is calling us to step into our creativity and set down a lot of the old ways of doing things, right? Like just this is how you hire people, or this is how you delegate. So I'd love to hear your sort of pulse on what it's going to take for us as visionaries or creatives to step up into this world that's changing, right? Not just AI and other tools that we're getting, but like humans really caring about expressing themselves and leaving an impact other than just money or material things. So I guess my question is first, are you sensing this shift? And what advice would you have for those of us who want to continue evolving and living 100% in our creativity?
Well, I think from my travels around the world that I see consciousness raising very rapidly. Mm-hmm. And I want to give women a great deal of credit for that, because I grew up in a family of really strong women. My aunt was a speechwriter for a senator. My mother was the mayor of the town. My aunt was a prominent school teacher. And my grandmother, there's no way to describe her. She was like Queen Victoria. She owned a lot of space in herself. And so I was very blessed in that regard. And one of the things that I've seen during my career is the number of amazing women, and I see them in business because I do a lot of work with executive coaching and that kind of thing. And so I get to see them all the time flourishing as they get more into their genius zone in corporate settings. But I think it's one of the greatest trends of our time that, like women are teaching things by the way they go about doing things that are so important for males to learn. Like I oftentimes see women are good at solving a problem without making everybody wrong or without making the other person wrong. Now that is a skill that men could really use in boardrooms across the world, because I sometimes get what I call parachuted into boardrooms to help solve some thorny problem that they can't get past. And I don't do it much anymore because I charge so much money for it now that nobody wants to hire me anymore. But back in the days, I did it for more reasonable amounts of money. I would come in, and here's where they would all be stuck. It would usually be men, and they would be stuck around some issue they were either sad or afraid about, but they hadn't declared that. And so a lot of times it was just pure emotional work. Like I can remember a time down at Dell Computer when I came in, and the top 3 people were kind of in an interlock. And it was because there was an unnamed fear that hadn't been really put forth. And the moment they could see that and feel that, they quickly dropped into their ability to solve the problem. So if there's something in a situation that people aren't willing to look at or aren't willing to experience or talk about, that becomes a driving force in keeping the problem alive. And so a lot of times it was so simple to me because I could walk into the room and I could see people's body language. Their arms would be folded across their chest and they'd be sitting back with a kind of a suspicious look on their face. And to watch them go from that to working together again in an hour, that's one of the most satisfying things, kind of from a coach and consultant's point of view. And in a way, there's nothing special about it if you just do the things that we know how to do. But people forget them when they're under stress. They forget to talk about their fear, and they forget to listen generously to the other person. They start listening to make him wrong or listening to rebut him or something like that.
Or in our line of work, we're like in the box. Like we have the principles, we know the tools, and then we can't like see ourselves in the box of like, oh yeah, like we should be practicing what we preach and we should be picking up these tools and, using what we know, that outside perspective. I know, the listener understands that idea of like tuning back in, getting that outside perspective to remember that so much of the conflict or the frustration is an emotional thing. And just like you're talking about, finding that spaciousness, taking those breaths, right? Like the spaciousness and the inner work is what all the outer work can come from. So I'm curious.
One time I just brought to mind, I used to often share the stage with the late Bob Proctor, and he always used to say, the instructions for how to get out of the box, unfortunately, are written on the outside of the box.
Exactly. Yes. So I'm so curious for you, Dr. Hendricks, what is next? Are you working on more books? What's on your horizon for this new era?
Ooh, great question. Well, let me give you a quick stack of things. First of all, what you can't see is the bottom half of my right leg here. I broke my femur at the end of March, and I've been rehabbing. I broke my femur in 5 places and cracked my knee. And so I have a big rod down the middle of my femur and 4 or 5 bolts that are holding me together. 12 weeks later, I'm right now in the transition from using a walker to using a cane. And so I've been rehabbing that madly for the past 3 months, and that's frankly taken quite a bit of energy. So I haven't really been thinking about, I've been kind of enjoying not writing, actually, frankly, just focusing on the simple things of life. So like every day I go out in my backyard and sit in the sun for a while, to keep connected to nature and to keep life energy flowing through me. And that's one thing I've been working on, and that's going to eventually come to an end, presumably, when I get both legs working under me again. So that's a biggie, but also another biggie just kind of fell into my lap a few weeks ago. There's a big company, or several big companies, that buys up the catalog of musicians that have had a number of hits that are bringing in a steady amount of money, or buys up the rights to collect the royalties of authors that have got a steady stream of income coming in. And they're pure money guys. They'll give you a couple of $1,000,000 if they think they're going to make a couple of $1,000,000 back from collecting your royalties. And so they're money guys. They'll give it to you up front. And I was recently approached by a big company that wants to buy my rights for a generous 7-figure amount. And I'm going to go ahead and do it, because then they will manage my literary legacy as a way after I'm not around here, and I need somebody to do that anyway. So I'm very blessed that I have books that are bringing in steady amount of royalties, even after some of them have been out there for 30 or 40 years. And so I'm about
talk
to
about
do
the
one
payoff
of the bigger deals of my life.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you're sharing that, because it's such a great result, like the payoff literally of committing your life to living 100% in creativity, staying in that genius zone. And I know at the beginning, or when you recommit to the genius zone, sometimes there's some letting go, clearing space, cleaning the garage, maybe letting some people go. But you are just such a testament of walking the walk. Well, soon you'll be back walking the walk. And
Limping the limp.
There we go. I won't ask if it was an Alp or not. We won't get into that, but.
Well, actually, I've done, of course, a lot of thinking about that.
Yeah.
I've never broken a bone before, so I think it was just an unconscious accident. I can't think of any good reason I would have upper limited myself. Things have been great for a long time. I'm probably one of the
and the
few
physical
people
manifestations, all around you otherwise are such a testament to your work. And I said before, your first book, The Big Leap, is what, putting into practice has helped us 3x revenue a few years ago. And now we're putting into work the genius zone. So let me know when you need me to write that testimonial for you. I'd be more than happy.
I would love you to write it. I would love. I'm looking for prominent people such as yourself, because what I forgot to mention is I have a big new book coming out in February.
Amazing.
Which is Your Big Leap Year, 365 days of big leaps. So it's something you can do every day, some little thing you can do every day. You touched on something earlier that I want to zoom in on, which is that a lot of little choices, you might have a big zoom boom experience of getting into your genius zone, but it's little choices that'll get you there, and little choice that'll keep you there. The choice of, am I going to need an apple or the extra large bag of onion chips? Am I going to go out for a mile walk, or am I going to catch this episode of Wheel of Fortune? Those little choices make a huge difference. And so, I'm all my dreams have come true, blessedly, or are still coming true. Like one of my dreams is to live in a loving relationship with the woman of my dreams. So that's still happening even after 44 years, which is kind of the big achievement of my life. Nobody else in my family has ever put together one of those long-term loving relationships. There are people in my family that have been married a long time, but they quit speaking to each other, 30 years into it or something like that. So Katie and I are having the time of our lives in our 70s, and so it is possible to really have a golden experience in your golden years. Part of it, I think, is neither of us have the slightest intention of ever retiring. Like, what would I do instead of sitting around talking to interesting people like you about the most interesting thing in the world to me, which is how to optimize our experience as human beings, how to be the geniuses that we are. So it doesn't matter if I'm doing that on a TV show or doing that here in the neighborhood, or I live across the street from a junior high school who they like to have me come over sometime and talk to the junior high kids about their genius and that kind of thing, which I love to do. It's just the most fun thing you might ever imagine. It's just as much fun as sitting there with the head of Microsoft or something. And so to me, as long as I get to make my my mantra come true, that every day I expand in love, creativity, and abundance as I inspire other people to do the same. As long as I can be doing that every day, I'm where I'm supposed to be.
Yes. Well, thank you for leading the way.
My pleasure.